This is Empires and Alliances, World War I across Europe. Huge map. This is really the, I don't know, child of Guns of August, a game that I never picked up back in the day. By the time that it came out, I had SPI's Little World War I, and I had the Rand game, The Great War. And most of what I kind of heard about Guns of August was, yeah, it kind of feels old-fashioned for the time period that it was being produced. It came out in the 80s, early 80s. And, you know, it got kind of lousy reviews from what I recall until I moved away for college, and then even actually later than that, after I was done with my first failure at college. Basically I dropped out with like one class to go, and then waited several years. And I think it was before, and it may have been after I finally got my degree. I'm not sure. But anyway, one of my friends, who had been a friend from the college days, he and I were discussing World War I games, and I was talking about what made La Grande Guerre so great compared to the other games that I had played at that point. Those earlier two, maybe something else. I don't think so, though. And it was basically the idea of national will, that the countries can kind of collapse just due to that kind of dire role. And he said that Guns of August had that already. And this does. This is, by the way, when I say it's sort of the child of, Rob Bema is one of the two designers of Guns of August. And I feel like this has tried to keep a lot of Guns of August in it, but also tried to modernize some things. Definitely bigger map, prettier map, much prettier map. It's a pity it couldn't have the kind of texture that Advanced Third Reich and Rising Sun had, but you know, still very lovely, and it's not glossy or anything like that. So, really a nice feature there. Anyhow, I had kind of Guns of August on my mind for a while, then heard that this was a revamping of it to some extent, and I just decided, you know, let me just order this, because it's got to have improvements on Guns of August. I have never looked at Guns of August, so I can't tell you, you know, that in comparison, but I can, you know, reflect this as I start going through it in comparison with the World War I games, all of which I think I've covered that I've played. I played, in addition to the three that I've mentioned, I played Lamps Are Going Out and Balance of Power, which is sort of a La Grande Guerre light and suffers. So here's the thing. I'm not going to say about Lamps. I don't recall that much about it. I liked it, but I don't. It's a lighter game, kind of like World War I is, and I think I like World War I better. But the other games of the series of the topic all have this problem where there's no reason. Like, one player wants to fight on one of the two fronts, and the other player doesn't, and you end up draining resources to a point that's kind of ahistorical in all La Grande Guerre, World War I, Great War, and Balance of Power. And it shows the worst, I think, in La Grande Guerre and Balance of Power, where the armies are so destroyed that you can't rebuild them to the historical rates. I'm hoping this gets around now. Again, I don't really feel Great War kind of has that happen. The Russian front collapses too early. That's a common issue that I've had with some of the games, not just that one. Because it's a goal that's achievable and the Central Powers can throw so much weight in, and if they can protect their West Front enough, they can do that. But anyway, that's sort of my initial talk about this. Component-wise, we got one little worry that I really don't like, but the units have an attack, a defense, and a movement allowance. You have a good distinction between all the different nations. Pretty normal kind of movement and stacking is going to be going on, and I've already set up the reinforcements coming around to July of 1915. You have, so far what I've looked at is a lot of the player aids are really just orders of battle and setup stuff. And why do I have, okay, why do I have 2 copies of this here? That makes sense. All right. Okay, yeah. So you have 3 sheets of orders of battle. And then you have 2 copies of each of these, which has the CRT, which looks a lot like an Avalon Hill CRT here. This is going to use 10-sided dice. I suspect they originally used 6-siders, so that may have changed a little bit here. Can't be sure. You have the terrain effects chart. Randomizing weather, that was in the original game, was kind of a big deal. Rail information. This is the, what is it? The war weariness, which is essentially the way to end the game. Now, both La Grande Guerre and, to a lesser extent, Balance of Power have, I think, a richer national morale type setup. La Grande Guerre is really, really rich, and it's one of the things that I love most about the game. But it can create a lot of randomness. But it's also the way that you get things like the Russian Revolution and whatnot in it. And in this, that seems like a relatively weak facet to the game. There's a little bit of errata here. I have found already during setup that there are things that didn't make it into here. They're pretty minor so far. I didn't want to look online to see if there's errata. If, you know, I look for errata when I feel like the game isn't making sense or there's big questions or something. And in my initial reading of the rules, I did not have any such questions come up for me. So we shall see. You have some off-map boxes in a few places. Interestingly, you could do something like, I mean, there's games that kind of tilt the map a little bit more than this does. So you've got like a lot of space that doesn't look very playable. So, you know, for example, Algeria and Tunisia, historically nothing happened in them, but if you're playing with the Italy entering as a Central Powers power, there's some possibility of that. Unfortunately, it's not much. So I think the map could have been made a lot smaller without really causing any issues, simply by tilting the orientation a little bit. Likewise, not a lot's going to happen in the Ottoman Empire itself. It's not of that much importance. Constantinople's important. These boxes are important, and they relate to it. But it feels like there's just too much empty and unusable space in the map. As units die, they're put in the replacement pool. You also get new, not reinforcements. As far as I can tell, you get new units that just get placed in the replacement box. This is the breakdown box. You can turn corps into divisions. I gotta get a paper clip for there. I'm using my removable tape, but I moved a piece from here to somewhere else, and then I've got like a book under there to keep things from pooching in an ungood way, but I'm a little worried this is kind of poochy here. My tables don't quite align perfectly. You keep track of weather, a couple of things here. But yeah, the big thing is, and why all this space seems particularly problematic, is you're not gonna have actual naval engagements or anything like that. There are naval rules, but they basically assume that the naval situation is pretty damn static, in the sense that the Allies or the Entente is going to control the Atlantic and the Mediterranean. The Black Sea has different facets. There's a reason for the Gallipoli invasion, and if you can succeed with that, you can get resources to Russia. The Baltic Sea, both Russia and Germany can kind of compete in it, but you're not fighting it out navally. It's just who can do naval shipments there. Obviously, big old turn record track over here, and that's where I've put all that stuff. Stuff like Sweden, that's not going to be in the game. Denmark's not going to be in the game. I thought the Netherlands was not able to be entered, but there are pieces and there are rules that have to do with it, so I'm assuming it can be. I remembered seeing something that listed certain nations as unable to be invaded. Obviously, Switzerland is always one, because the one exception being La Grande Guerre, where Switzerland is a reasonable option, and the Germans, instead of doing a Schlieffen plan, could make a move through Switzerland, although, you know, it would probably have taken them several years to come up with that kind of plan as well. There's special rules for Schlieffen and for, what is it, Plan 17 or whatever, the French response to it. There's the sparseness of the Eastern Front compared to the thick forces aligned against each other in the West. And yeah, let's jump in, take a look at the rules. I'm gonna have to change batteries yet again. I don't think this was actually a battery. I switched batteries. That's why there was a little flicker at the beginning. I switched batteries right at the beginning because this one wasn't charged, but I don't think that was a charging failure. I think that was a failure of I had two things charging and just kind of put this camera down with the battery that was in it and didn't bother. Get into too much more. Some other counters. They're these railhead counters, double-sided, both say the same thing on them. They're meant to represent the Central Powers rail net limits, but rail nets, like I feel like there's a possibility that you could get into situations in the game where the railheads aren't going to quite work. Basically, it's making the assumption that the Central Powers are going to conquer territory on all of their enemies, which is generally the case, but you roll the rail net like you convert rail hexes. And that's how the railhead moves. And if the Russians are doing very well in Austria or something, they may be advancing their rail net, and the railhead might not work properly for that. I'm a little worried about that. We have demoralizations here. Automatic victory, essentially if you get an overrun type attack, but because this is World War I, overruns are not as impressive as they are in most games that have them. Basically, the units that are involved in the overrun can't get involved in any other attacks nor continue moving. But they can blow a hole open that other units can move through. These are the C movement markers. Unsupplied markers, there's different levels of being unsupplied. Generally, 2 turns out of supply will kill your units though. These guys are rail used. I'm not quite sure what they're for. We'll see what that is. There's a whole bunch of them. It may be limitations on particular sections of rail, or it may be that the unit used rail movement. I suspect it's the former. And then we have a whole bunch of these trench level 1 and 2. In addition to the trenches, before I get to them, we also have some specific fortifications put on the board, which can be destroyed. But let's talk about trenches. Most of the games that I have that handle World War II, or World War I, handle entrenchment in one of 2 ways. Something like the Great War just incorporates it into the counters. You have 2 different sides to the counters, one side that's entrenched, one side that's mobile. The mobile side allows you to attack and whatnot. The entrenched side allows, gives you a better defense. I think Le Grand Guerre handled it in sort of a mixed version, where if you just took if you just advanced into a new hex or something, you weren't yet entrenched and you got a little marker or something like that to indicate that special case. But basically, the idea of most of that game, at least, is that everybody is entrenched all the time except when they're not. But this eats up a huge quantity of countermix in order to represent what is going to be kind of the standard state all over the place. I find that incredibly inelegant, and I'm worried it's going to just be a pain in the ass all over the place. But we shall see. All right, let's start digging in. It's essentially a 2-player game. Yeah, here, Switzerland, Denmark, Sweden, and Spain are neutral. Okay, no, I thought Netherlands was in there. No one can enter these. British forces are going to start in Britain, and you have to ship them over. Using sea movement, U.S. Can arrive in Britain, but they can also arrive in France. Some of the Commonwealth will show up in the Middle East. Some colonial forces show up in North Africa. That could just be a box, because there's no naval, there's no Central Powers naval capability in the Mediterranean, so why bother? Antwerp cannot be used for sea movement or sea supply if, and we got 2 hexes, if there's an enemy in 2150 or 2251. These 2, I guess. 2150. 2251 is the Antwerp hex, right? No, it's Ghent. Okay. Yeah, so that makes sense. They're cutting the access to the sea there. Crimea. Units can use rail movement across 47 this, but you can't land move across it. Got our units there. Sizes of some importance, obviously type. Unit number is not that important. Setup code is done by the armies or other locations. That's for the 1914 scenario only. And then, like I said, attack, defense, movement. Got some just informational stuff about different types of units. Colors for the nationalities are all spread out here. Just looking. Rail used. Used to indicate units that have used rail movement this turn. That's odd. Yeah, I would think it would be the sections, but I didn't remember any rules on that. And I'm not really quite sure why you would need to mark that you used rail movement. Maybe there's something that I'm not aware of. The demoralized markers have two different sides to them. Demoralized and demoralized this segment. Essentially, demoralized is a lesser result. Demoralized this segment takes longer to recover from, if I recall correctly. You have your sun and your moon. That's about it. Control. This is very weird. Like, most of it is not like that, but there are some pages where they decided to make the column sizes very, very different. Just really, yeah, and like all Compass games, there has to be something wrong with the graphics to it. And I'll tell you, one thing is the entrenchment and the demoralized, unsupplied markers are very close in appearance to each other. There's not really a huge attempt to work with that. Another thing was the setup numbers printed in white on the counters. Zooming in, it's pretty easy to see. I found them hard to distinguish. I don't know why, but I mean, my eyes are getting older, but also that white print is kind of blurry looking. All right. Control of a hex changes just by entering it. Some units have zones of control. Infantry, cav, and field artillery have a zone of control into their hexes. Can't be projected across sea, unfrozen lakes, or into neutrals. Siege artillery, tank, and air units do not. It's another thing. The air units, the air rules are less. So for a game that includes air units, they're less detailed than they are in Le Grand Guerre or Balance of Power. You're not going to be actually doing any dogfighting as far as I see it. They just get flown in and included in attacks. An enemy zone of control can be negated for tracing supply by a friendly unit other than air units in the hex. Stacking is 3 infantry or cavalry units, corps or division. You can add an additional field artillery unit, and then you can add a second field artillery unit as long as your corps or divisions is 2 or less. And you're allowed to add a siege artillery and a tank unit to each stack. I gotta worry about my battery, it's not charging there. Oh, and this one's dying. Stack only takes place at the is only checked at the end of movement and end of combat. If you're overstacked at those times, you have to eliminate. You can only do that by cheating, I think. Air units can base at friendly cities, no more than 2 in a major city, 1 in a minor city. If the opposing player takes control of the city, the air units can fly to a friendly city within 8 hexes, otherwise they're eliminated. It is Saturday morning, relatively early still. Yeah, awfully pretty day. I did not go dancing last night. I slept all day and then slept for a fair amount of the night, and figured I'd hit into this. Let's take a quick look at sequence of play, and then I think I just let my batteries charge. You roll to check weather for the turn. Central Powers then gets his turn. Any reinforcements and replacements come in. Check supply for his units. Can entrench units and then move units. Resolve any attacks other than the automatic victories which clear a space. And then advances railheads, checks supply of any unsupplied units, removes demoralization on demoralized side from his units. Now, again, we have the DTS and drops the DTSs to Ds. Then the allied player gets the same sequence. Then, once you hit December of 1915, you start checking national morale for the countries. And that can start causing issues with their armies, making them less effective, etc. I believe with their production, and it can go all the way to just a full surrender. And then you advance to the next turn. Every turn is going to be 1 month, except, and so many games do this, there's a double turn for that first August because things were really, really fluid during the initial invasions. Use your movement factor, the third number. You can't move directly. Oh no, a unit may move directly from an enemy zone of control to another by expending 1 additional movement point. The unit is not required to stop moving just because it entered an enemy zone of control. And you can always move 1 hex. We've got the terrain chart here. For the most part, not too exciting. Everything costs 1 except forests, swamps, and mountains, which cost 2. Let's look at rail movement. I guess we'll get a little further in. You're allowed to move your units along friendly rail hexes that were controlled at the beginning of your movement phase. You expend 1 movement point to entrain. That'll give you 30 hexes, although weather can intervene with this, to move along the railroad. After completing your rail move, you detrain by expending a movement point. You can't end your movement phase entrained, but you can detrain for no movement points at the end of your movement. So you could spend, let's say you had a 4 movement point unit, you could spend 3 movement points to get to a rail and train, move on the rails, and then detrain for free. You may not train, detrain, or use rail movement in an enemy zone of control. Friendly units don't help you there. The number of hexes is reduced by weather, yeah. You can rail across rail ferries at Messina and Constantinople. These will cost 6 to cross. We have this little thing which is not a rail ferry. It is a straight hex side, and it just adds 1 to your movement, as well as giving some combat effects. All right, the number of units that a player may rail each turn is limited. The rail capacity chart shows how many corps each country can rail. Units count as 1 corps each for purposes of rail capacity, except for non-US divisions and artillery with an attack factor of 1, which only count as a half corps. If you rail a unit into another country, it counts against the capacity of both countries. Now, this is kind of weird. I'm not entirely sure, and maybe the example, I don't think the example tells me. I feel like I read them. If I am German units in Austria-Hungary and rail only inside Austria-Hungary, I think the rail limit only counts against Austria-Hungary. But it's not spelled out that way. It kind of sounds almost like I would be paying German rail costs as well as Austrian costs. The number of Luxembourg is considered part of German RailNet. The number of corps that a major power can rail on the railroads of minor country is increased from 3, which is their base, to 6 if a path can be traced along that railway to a supply source in the major power. So you're able, that's the one place where it feels like you're using your own rail stock now instead. So it's like, yeah, maybe it does just count against the Germans to use Austrian rail net as well as against the Austrians. I'm not sure. The railhead itself. Railroads were important. You can advance your railheads during administrative. The initial locations are defined. The central powers can extend a railhead if a ground unit began the movement phase in the hex or entered the hex during the central powers player segment. The ground unit used to extend the railhead was in supply, and a path free of enemy units or enemy zone of control can be traced along that railroad to the central power supply source. So you need a unit to push your railhead forward, but you've sort of broken the enemy rail net, which is why I'm saying there's something kind of weird with just tracking it with the German ones. That makes sense if you're playing, if the Central Powers is expanding territory everywhere. Like, but once they start losing territory, then things, I think, become fuzzier. You know? We'll talk about that in a bit. The Allied players' railheads are considered to be on the connecting rail hexes that are adjacent to the CP railheads. The Allied player extends his railheads by pushing back the central power railheads in the same manner as the central power extends them. I mean, I can be occupying hexes that you can't use, but I'm not destroying your rail net. I guess that's what it comes down to. So it is just binary. It's one side or the other's rail net. Anyway, each railhead can be extended a maximum of 3 hexes during clear weather, 2 during mud, 1 during snow. When extending through multiple weather zones, use the more restrictive rate. I don't know if I feel like doing sea movement yet. So I'm going to put this here and charge this battery. For a couple hours, had a nice dream, I guess. And let's get back up here. Nowhere near as pretty as it was in the morning. I mean, I guess it's still morning. Sea movement. You can move your units by sea. You have to embark in a friendly port for a movement point. You can move an unlimited distance through sea hexes to another friendly port. There are some restrictions on this. After completing the sea move, you debark with another movement point. You can't spend your movement phase at sea. You can debark with no movement points remaining. Same thing as with the rails. But then you end your movement in that hex. The ports must be controlled by the phasing player at the start of the movement phase. You can use ground unit both before and after. To move from an Atlantic to a Mediterranean requires all your movement points, however. You must begin in a port and end in the port of debarkation. Western allies can conduct sea movement anywhere in the Atlantic or Mediterranean. The British player can conduct sea movement in the Black Sea only if he controls all 5. And I'm assuming it's 1, 2, yeah, let's see what they are. 5918. That's here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Probably the 6th one too. Uh, 5918, 5919, 6019. Scutari, okay. 6025 and 6124. 6025 is going to be here, 6124. So I guess it's the hexes. Yeah. Okay. The German player can conduct sea movement to and from German ports on or Riga in the Baltic Sea, sorry. The Gulf of America. The Russian player can conduct sea movement to and from Russian ports in the Baltic Sea and to and from Russian, Romanian, or Bulgarian ports in the Black Sea. Now, what's important there, you have to control the port. So when it says Russian ports, it really means I can only do it between the three ports that began as Russia. And the idea, I'm not sure what the situation is there, because honestly, the German fleet could have contested and pretty much gained control of the Baltic. But historically, they kind of didn't. The Kaiser wanted to keep his fleet in, didn't want to waste it against the Russians. But he didn't use it against the Brits very much either. Number of units that you can move by sea is limited. It'll be listed by corps for each country, for each turn. The same thing, divisions cost half, except for U.S. divisions, and one factor field artillery counts as half. I don't know how many of them there are. The Allied player can use sea movement to conduct an invasion, and they did one. An invasion is defined as sea movement from a friendly port to an enemy-controlled port or beach. The Allied units must begin the movement in a friendly port in supply and not in an enemy zone. Invading an Atlantic port, they have to begin in an Atlantic port. Invading in a Mediterranean, they must begin their move in a Mediterranean port. Only British, Canadian, Australian, Anzac, French, and U.S. units can conduct invasion. Siege artillery and tanks may not. Air units may not conduct, although they can support them if within range. I am guessing that siege artillery and tanks can support them if within a range too, which is 1 hex. But the Allied player may invade in the Black Sea if he controls the hexes listed. Units invading in the Black Sea must begin their move in a Mediterranean port. I assume they could also begin in a black port. And I'm going to just say the black and the Mediterranean count as the same thing, presuming you have access through there. The invading, and this is the kind of thing where it's very easy to just say, hey, don't nail down all that. It's fine. We can figure it out. The invading units are moved adjacent to the invasion hex. A maximum of 1 stack can invade a hex. If the invasion hex is not occupied, they land in that hex and end their move. They may not attack adjacent enemy units. If the hex is occupied by enemy units, they have to attack them. The attack may be made in conjunction with other friendly stacks that are attacking the hex. Yep. If all the defending units are eliminated or retreated, the invading units, including field artillery, advance into the hex. Invading units may advance even after an ND result. Yeah. So ND is sort of an exchange type result. I don't know if they write it down here. No, they don't. I guess it's basically neither defeated or something like that. Neither demoralized. I don't know. But you still have to clear the hex. And ND doesn't give you a victory, is how I'm going to take that. And you'll see why in a bit. The Royal Navy counter represents the naval support available for an invasion. The Allied player places it on one of the hexes being invaded. It can provide naval support fire for one or more attacks being made against that hex. It cannot exceed the number of attack factors of the invading ground units in the hex. The total number cannot exceed 3. This is not affected in any way by ground combat results. This factor cannot be used to absorb any losses, nor is it counted when determining exchange losses. At the end of that Allied combat phase, the Royal Navy counter is placed on the time track on the earliest turn in which the Allied player is eligible to make another invasion. This will be within the scenario. If all the defending units are not eliminated or retreated during combat phase, and this is why I say in ND, you have to clear the hex. The remaining invading units are eliminated, but half of the total attack factors are added to your infantry replacement points. I haven't explained this. There's a track down here and a bunch of counters, which I don't know where I put them. Here they are, which cover replacement points and other factors for all the nations. You're going to have different kinds of replacement points. There's infantry and artillery. I don't know if there's also tank. And you buy your units using those. And there's other circumstances where you get points back for losing a battle. An evacuation is defined as a sea movement from a beach hex to a friendly port. What did we have to? Beach hexes. I don't know what beaches look like. Okay. We don't have a key on the map. We have the key built into here. It's got a little bit of green on it. There's an example. But you can always invade at a port too. I'm a little disturbed, like there's no beaches in Sicily. I feel like, or at least I can't see one. I feel like there should be one here. We got some beaches in Normandy, that's important. Very few in Germany, which is of actual importance in this game. Okay. Movement from a beach hex to a friendly port. The evacuated units must begin in the beach hex and end the movement in the friendly port. They must be evacuated to an... if they're in the Atlantic, they have to be evacuated to Atlantic, and Mediterranean have to be evacuated to Mediterranean. To demoralize, this segment marker is placed on the evacuated units. Siege artillery and tank cannot be evacuated. A unit may use both rail and sea movement during the same movement phase as long as they have enough movement points to do both. Automatic victory. This is not winning the game, it's combat. It's the overrun type thing. This is a form of combat that is conducted during movement. The moving player can overwhelm a small force and prevent it from blocking his move for the entire turn. To get an automatic victory, you have to move sufficient units adjacent to the defender to get an 8-to-1 attack. This goes up to 10-to-1 if they're in a forest, swamp, or major city, or in a hex with an entrenchment or a fort, or if the weather is mud or snow. And it goes to 12-to-1 if they're both applied. Attacking units may be in different hexes as long as all are eligible to attack. The attacking units must also satisfy stacking limits at the time that they achieve the AV. Remember, you don't have to check stacking during movement, so until the end of movement. So that had to be put in there. Once the AV has been achieved, the defending units are immediately eliminated and placed in the replacement pool. The units used to achieve it may not move any further that movement phase and cannot attack during the following combat phase. They may advance into the vacated hex. Automatic victory markers are placed on the units used to achieve it to show they cannot move nor attack for the remainder of the player segment. The AV markers will be removed at the end of the combat, but they open up a hole that you can exploit through. The phasing player can then continue to move other units. They can move it as if the defending unit eliminated in the AV was never there. They may even move into or through the hex formerly occupied by the unit. I got some questions about how this is going to be, you know, how effective this is going to be. This may be a way to try and allow some of the fluidity of the early stages of the war, and then make the trenches kind of hold up a little bit more so that you don't get that kind of exploitation very often. Combat. In combat, you can attack enemy units. The phasing player may attack as few or as many hexes as he wishes. It's voluntary, unless you're invading. An attack must be directed against a single enemy hex occupied by at least one enemy unit or fort. The attacker may only attack that hex with adjacent units. Units may not attack across sea or unfrozen lakes. You may split up an attack against a hex into 2 or more attacks. This is going to be kind of funky. Provided that he attacks every defending unit of the hex at 1 to 5 odds or better. Okay. But it makes it sound like you're attacking hexes. And I don't think that's the case. You're attacking units in hexes, I believe. The attacker is not required to attack with all units in a stack. Some of the units in the stack may even attack another hex. The defender cannot withhold any units in the hex being attacked from combat. The attacker may not split the attack factor of a single unit. The entire unit must be allocated to one attack. Each attacking unit may only attack once per combat phase. Each defending unit may only be attacked once per combat phase. Okay. So the way this is worded makes it sound like I could attack an entire hex, or I could split up and attack defending units individually. That's how I read just this. But we're going to see that's going to change, I think. The attacker designates a hex that he is attacking and all his units that are attacking that hex. The defender may designate artillery and tank units to defend along with infantry. So here it says you designate a hex. The defender may designate artillery and tank to defend with infantry or cav in the hex. A maximum of 1 artillery and 1 tank may defend with a single infantry or cavalry. If the defender chooses not to allocate artillery and tank, they may be attacked separately. The attacker then designates all attacks versus all units in the defending hex and then resolves them one at a time in any order that he chooses. You calculate an odds ratio, kind of by standard means. Remember there's attack and defense factors. Odds greater than 7 to 1 are treated as 7 to 1, 1 to 5. Less than 1 to 5 aren't allowed. You wouldn't want to except to get the soaks. Determine the net die roll modifier by subtracting the total defender DRM from the total attacker DRM. This will be most a plus or minus 3. And we have those here. You roll a die, guess a single 10-sider, consult the CRT to determine the results. A net die roll less than -1 is treated as -1, greater than 12 is treated as 12. As written, an attack against an air unit or a fort by itself in a hex is an automatic DE, defender eliminated. An artillery tank, that's weird. So a fort can't stand on its own. An artillery tank or air unit cannot attack by itself. At least 1 infantry or cav must also participate in the attack. The number of attacking artillery and tank cannot exceed the number of infantry and cav units in the attack. How we put that and, I'm not sure. Is that a summation of the two, or it feels like it is? Okay. Results, AE, AX, the attacker eliminates attack factors at least equal to the number of defender factors. The surviving attacking units do not retreat. AD, the attacker demoralizes a corps for each defending corps. The first corps demoralized must be the one with the largest attack factor. If the defender has more corps than the attacker, then all attacking units are demoralized. All surviving attacking units are then retreated. That sounds like just demoralized, not demoralize this segment. ND is no decision. The attacker eliminates his unit with the largest attack factor. The defender eliminates defense factors at least equal to the number of attack factors lost by the attacker. If 2 or more attacking units have the same attack factor, the attacker can choose which unit to lose. And this is the weird thing that we were talking about. It seemed like there was there might be a specific exception that just allows you to win battles if you get this. I think you have to still clear the hex. The smaller smaller force eliminated, larger force must remove factors at least equal to the number of smaller force factors. HX, the defender is eliminated. The attacker must remove units with attack factors equal to at least half the defense factors removed. We didn't have a DX. DD, the defender is demoralized and retreats, and DE, all defenders are eliminated. All losses on AX, NDEX, or HX are based on the number of attack or defense factors printed on the counter. You don't modify them for that. When a player takes losses, at least 1 infantry or cav unit must be lost, if possible. That is, artillery and tank. Units cannot be chosen or take all the required losses unless they're defending by themselves an attack. The number of artillery or tank units lost cannot exceed the number of infantry and cav units that are lost if possible. When 2 or 3 units defend together, see Rule 13.62. Okay, so this is interesting. See, that's about defending with artillery and tank. When 2 or 3 units defend together, an ND result for the defender is handled in the following manner. If any of the units defending together are eliminated, then the other unit or units that defended together with them are retreated and demoralized. Here we have an example. Defender has a 464 infantry, a 353, and a 333. The defender chooses to have the 333 defend with the 4... Okay, that's the artillery with the 464. The attacker attacks the hex with 3 684s and 1 333 field artillery unit at 1-to-1 odds. That's attacking the whole hex. An ND result is rolled. The attacker loses the largest unit. The defender is required to lose 6 defense factors. They choose to lose his 464 infantry. The field artillery is retreated and demoralized. It sounds to me like you can attack a whole hex at once. I'm not sure why you would split things up. I guess to be able to get good odds on one unit and kill it, but maybe shittier odds on another unit. This is all very weird. Like, the way this is worded just is, it's uncomfortable to me. But I'm not seeing anything that changes this initial standing, which is you attack a hex, but you could attack multiple units in the hex if you wish. I mean, you got some weird stuff, like if they don't throw their artillery in, you can attack that separately, so you could get some good odds. But when and how do you decide that? The attacker designates the hex and all units that are attacking. The defender designates which units he's defending with. If he chooses not to allocate artillery and tank, they can be attacked separately. Then the attacker designates all attacks versus all units in the defending hex and then resolves them one at a time. I think we have an idea of what that all means, but it does swirl in a funny sort of way. If you have to retreat, you retreat all your units that were in the attack 1 hex. If possible, the units must retreat to a hex where the length of their supply line is no longer than the hex they were in. The retreating units are eliminated if they're forced to retreat into an enemy zone of control, regardless of friendly units, across a sea or unfrozen lake, into a neutral country, or off the map board. You may retreat into a hex where it will exceed stacking only if there's no other legal retreat route. In this case, all retreating units in excess of the stacking limit retreat an additional hex. If they're still overstacked after that second hex, they're eliminated. The phasing player places a demoralized this segment marker on his demoralized unit. The non-phasing player places a regular demoralized marker on his units. Demoralized, okay, so this answers the question here. If something's demoralized, if it's the phasing player being demoralized, he gets a DTS. There's a high cost to the attack. Demoralized units, because you recovered at the end of your turn. Demoralized units lose their ZOC, have their movement factors, may not move into an enemy ZOC during their movement phase. If they're in one, they must move away if possible. If they cannot move out, they do not move. They're not allowed to attack. They have their defense factor. If they suffer a DD result while already demoralized, it flips to the DTS side. Guess that could I don't know how that could happen. Oh, if you were recovering from demoralization. The phasing player then removes demoralized markers from his units and flips demoralized this segment to their demoralized side during the administration phase. To remove a demoralized marker, the unit must be in supply and not in an enemy zone of control, but a DTS will always be flipped. If an attack clears all defending units in a hex with a DE, DD, HX, or EX, any attacking infantry or cavalry that participated may advance into that hex. This must be exercised before any other attacks are resolved. This is why the ND rule is necessary. Why an invasion has to be able to take the hex on an ND. It's if you clear the hex and the ND combination, and it's just how I'm going to read it. The option to advance must be exercised before any other attacks are resolved. Advancing units may not exceed stacking limits. If the attacker advances into a hex, any defender entrenchments or forts are eliminated. The defender never advances after combat. It's going to put us to supply, but my voice is wearing out, so I'm going to break for a bit. Okay, so no war game of this size would work properly without some sort of supply rules. During supply phase, you check the supply status of all your units. You get an unsupplied level 1 on unsupplied units. If it's already at 1 and is still unsupplied, it flips to 2. If it's already unsupplied at 2, and is still unsupplied, it'll be eliminated. During the admin phase, the phasing player checks supply status of all units that have an unsupplied marker on them. If they can now trace supply, they get to lose it. If they're still unsupplied, they don't increase it. A supply path, there's one of 2 ways. You can trace an overland path a maximum of 5 hexes in length from the unit to a supply source. The hex occupied by the unit is not counted. The supply source hex is counted. The path may not be traced across sea or unfrozen lake, through a neutral country, or through a hex in an enemy zone unless there's a friendly unit in the zone, which can only work for the overland portion of the supply path. Alternatively, you can trace a path a maximum of 5 hexes from the unit to a friendly railroad, and then along that railroad to the supply source. Once the supply path reaches the railroad, the supply path cannot go through enemy zones of control, even if there's a friendly unit present. Mud and snow reduce the supply paths. Therefore, your rail nets are really, really important. And as we saw in La Grande Guerre, there's some ugly situations in terms of the rail nets, and they're replicated here, between, say, France and Germany, where this game is at a smaller scale. The map is blown up a little bit compared to the La Grande Guerre, and the supply range is a little bit more forgiving. So you're going to be able to go a little deeper into France, I think, given that. Even though the map is blown up, I think the hex distance for supply is a little bit more forgiving than it is in LGG. Supply source is a network of 3 or more major cities in your home country or an ally. How do we distinguish major cities? So minor cities are these dots, major cities are these things, I believe. Yep. The major cities in this network must be linked by controlled rail hexes. A city ceases to be part of a full supply source network when either the city or any of the rail hexes connecting it to other cities in the network is occupied or in the zone of an enemy unit. A full supply source can supply an unlimited number of units. London is also a full supply source, which, there's no ability to invade Britain. You can see there's basically nothing in Britain but London, the port. Okay, but they're a limited supply source, which is a city in your home country or an ally or an off-board box. Each non-US division or one factory artillery counts as half a corps. All other units count as a corps. City ceases to be limited when all adjacent non-neutral land hexes are occupied by or are in the zone of control of enemy units. And so you can be a limited supply source even though you can't contribute to being a full supply source. An off-board box provides supply for both Central Powers and allied units that are in the off-board boxes. I'm not sure about the designation of these boxes. Let's break for a teeny bit and take a look at the map, because this is broken into 3 pieces, and I don't know why. You know, Caucasus represents the off-board of the Caucasus and a major power. Yeah, it's not really telling me anything. I don't know why they're broken into into separate things. I put the Russians in the middle. Maybe there's going to be more. I don't recall there being more. I think these are just single boxes that are divided up for no good reason. But we shall see. A major city can supply 6 core, a minor city can supply 3, an off-board box can supply 6 core. Sea supply. A limited number of units can trace supply by sea. A unit can trace an overland supply path, a maximum of 5 hexes in length, from the unit to a friendly port or beach, and then across the sea to a supply source. Alternately, the unit can trace a path of 5 hexes from a unit to a friendly railroad, and then the railroad to the port, and then across the supply source. You use sea supply in sea areas to which you can use sea movement. I'm assuming that limits by ports as well. So when we look at the Baltic, things are kind of interesting there. So the Russians can only go to Russian ports. The Germans can only go to German ports and Riga. And basically, you know, how far you go in the land does determine to some extent where your supplies last, because Riga can go in either direction. The number of core that can be supplied in a sea turn is limited. Each core or of a sea movement capacity that is not used for sea movement can be used to supply 6 core at sea. Okay. So if you don't do sea movement, you can utilize the ships that you could have used for sea movement to supply. So it's an interesting kind of balance as to how many troops you can actually get injected somewhere. And we have the sea capacity here. So Britain, for example, only has 3 core that they can support at the beginning. And I believe that sea capacity leads over everything. So if you wanted to supply a Gallipoli invasion, that might weaken what you could supply in the Atlantic. Of course, you don't have to worry about the forces in France because you can trace to an ally's main supply source, but just pointing that out. When reducing combat factors between fractions, this is if you're unsupplied, you lose movement point, and your combat factor gets multiplied by 3/4, but as it gets worse, it gets worse. A major city or fort will delay unsupplied effects 1 turn. Well, what does that mean? The example kind of explains it. A unit in a fort that's at unsupplied level 2 suffers the effects of unsupplied level 1. A unit in a major city or fort that's at unsupplied level 2 is not eliminated. It's incremented to unsupplied 3 instead. If this unit is still unsupplied level 3 at the beginning of the next supply phase, it'll be eliminated. There is no unsupplied level 3 here. I assume the effect's the same as 2. Well, yeah, there wouldn't be, because you're subtracting 1 off the unsupplied level if you were in a fort or a major city. Fortifications. Pre-war forts are represented by fort counters. There aren't a hell of a lot of them, less than there are in LGG. Trenches constructed during the war are represented by entrenchment counters. Players receive forts in their initial forces. No new forts can be built. A fort provides the following capabilities. The defender receives a combat DRM equal to the level of the fort. Units in the hex... I guess they don't generate strength points. Units in a hex containing a fort may ignore retreat results. On an AD or DD result, the units are demoralized but are not required to retreat. Units in a hex containing a fort have their unsupplied effects delayed by a turn. Entrenchments. Players receive entrenchments in their initial forces as specified by scenarios. That'll be none in 1914, but you can begin constructing entrenchments beginning in the October 1914 turn. An infantry unit that's in supply can build a level 1 entrenchment at the beginning of the movement phase by expending all its movement for that turn. Other types of units may not construct entrenchments. A player may not build an entrenchment in a hex containing a fort. You may voluntarily remove a fort at the beginning of the movement phase. Once removed, you can't return it to play. I don't think there's any particular... Well, let's see if entrenchments are better for any reason. Beginning in January 1916, players can upgrade an existing level 1 entrenchment to a level 2, representing the construction process, repeating the construction process. Level 2 entrenchments are on the flip side of level 1. The defender in a hex containing an entrenchment gets a combat DRM equal to the level of the entrenchment. If at least 50% of the defending corps in that hex are in entrenchments of at least that level. I don't know what that means. Sounds like you're constructing entrenchments on a per unit basis. The defender, all non-U.S. divisions are counted as half a corps. An artillery or tank unit defending with an entrenched infantry unit also benefits from the entrenchment. Artillery and tank are not counted when determining whether 50% of the corps are entrenched. So here they talk about a defending hex contains one entrenched, one non-entrenched. Really feels like the Great War type situation where units in that game are flipped over to indicate that they are entrenched. You know what? There is no goddamn reason they couldn't have done that in this game. These units don't have a backside of any importance. It has a flag on it. It would have been much, much better to have an entrenched format for the unit and a non-entrenched. And I don't know. I don't know which way we want to do things. Because we're going to have to keep track of entrenchment levels as well, right? Yeah, it really feels like you... So, the problem is the difference between level 1 and level 2. I like LGG's solution better because it actually is just everybody's entrenched unless they're moving. Once they start moving, they're no longer entrenched, but you have like counterattacks and stuff that happen. So there are 4 types of special units: Strasstruppen, siege artillery, tanks, and air units, and only siege artillery at the beginning. Strasstruppen, they function as infantry, except the Central Powers gets a +1 DRM to an attack for each Strasstruppen participating in the attack with a maximum of +3. If the Central Powers takes any losses in an attack where a Strasstruppen DRM was used, he must lose at least 1 Strasstruppen unit. On an ND, the requirement to lose a Strasstruppen overrides the requirement to lose the largest factor unit. Siege artillery. The attacking player adds a +1 DRM to an attack versus a hex containing a fort for each siege artillery in the attack. The maximum siege artillery DRM in an attack is equal to the level of the defending fort. They also have firepower, attack and defense capabilities. I'm kind of worried because this game uses straight odds chart. There's really good arguments that doesn't really work. These are put forward in both the Great War and in World War I. They're applied very well throughout La Grande Guerre and throughout Balance of Power. The heavier your attack tended to be, historically, and as reflected in those games, the more damage both sides took. Like throwing lots of troops in just created more damage for everyone. And it's also not really relating the differential between firepower, the artillery, concept and just strength points. It's a very it's still at core, and I wouldn't expect it to be different, but it's still at core a game that in the early 80s when it came out felt old-fashioned in that sort of way. Tanks. The allied player adds a +1 DRM to an attack for each tank unit participating in the attack. The maximum tank DRM in an attack is +3. Again, it's not... It's hard to tell because it's a complex odds table. Like, it's a large odds table. It's not trivial to see how this is going to work out. We're going to have to look at it. But again, the tanks are more about turning something into a retreat than they are, and the Straßtruppen the same thing, than they are simply, creating a defender eliminated type situation in general. Although if they're surrounding and cutting troops off, you can make that argument. But I just feel like this is too simplistic a combat system to actually adequately portray World War I. The designer, I don't know if it was the designer. No, it was a comment on BGG. But one of the comments, one of the great complaints about the original Guns of August was that not much happened. It was very static, and it's like, yeah, but World War I was static. That I don't feel like is a valid complaint. The valid complaint is whether or not this adequately represents the stages of warfare and everything along those lines. And I'm feeling pretty shaky about it from reading the rules so far. The maximum tank DRM is +3. A tank DRM may not be used against a defender in a forest, swamp, or mountain. Straßtruppen are better. We're out of battery. A tank unit is halved when attacking across a river. A tank unit may support an attack only if there's at least one infantry corps of that nationality for each tank unit attacking. If the allied player suffers any losses in an attack where a tank DRM was used, he must lose at least one tank unit. On an ND, the allied player must lose his largest factor unit and a tank unit. All right. How does that affect the ND result? Oh, I got to kill the battery. ND is resolved. The attacker eliminates the unit with the largest attack factor. The defender eliminates defense factors at least equal to the number of attack factors lost. If the tank is added in, I think it is going to add to the number of defense factors that have to be lost. Now, defense factors are larger than attack factors, so that's kind of an advantage to the defender there. Air units. During the movement phase, air units may fly up to 4 hexes from their base to a hex being attacked during the combat phase. A maximum of 3 air units can be allocated to a hex to support attacks against enemy units in that hex. If the air units are not used to support attacks, they may transfer up to 10 hexes to a new base. Air unit movement is not affected by terrain, enemy units, or enemy zone of control. During combat, a +1 DRM is added to an attack for each air unit supporting the attack. This can go to a maximum of +2. A third air unit could be used to support the attack if the attacker makes 2 or more attacks against units in the hex. Again, I'm really fuzzy about that, but an air unit may support an attack only if there's at least one infantry of that nationality for each air unit attacking after combat. The air units may land at any friendly cities within 4 hexes of the hex they attack. So all they do is they add to your attack value, and there's a lot of abstraction going on there. Observation, recon, all kind of stuff like that happening. But you know what there isn't? There isn't any kind of air-to-air combat, any air superiority or anything like that, which feels weird. Both sides are going to be able to take advantage of their air power on offensive. You might be able to make an argument in favor of that, but again, it definitely feels kind of funky to me to not the DRM seems to be the magic thing that just fixes everything, that handles everything in the combat in this game. We're going to hold off on the reinforcements and replacements. This is a fairly long rule book, but fairly simple. So we're not even halfway through, but I feel like we've gone through the meat of the game. Back up here. Just watched the Discriminating Gamers top 10 from GMT. It's kind of interesting. From 6 down, I played all of them. He did like a set of 50 top games from GMT. I don't generally agree with him 100%. Well, or anywhere near that, of course. But I do find his reviews sometimes interesting, or I did back in the past, and I haven't been watching much anymore. I'm not really on the lookout for new games. Particularly, I'm more trying to avoid being convinced into buying things. But, yeah. I don't know how I feel. So one of the things, not here, over here, in the order of play, order of battle thing, they have these add something. They also have these, which I believe are normal reinforcements. These, I think, are added to the replacement pool. And we're going to hit the roll where maybe I find that out. It was not in the scenario setup rules what to do about them. Reinforcements represent new units being raised. Replacements are replacing units in the replacement pool. During the reinforcement phase, you bring in both. Countries receive reinforcements according to the OOB. You can choose to delay bringing them on until the following reinforcement. There's no limit to how many turns. Reinforcements are placed in controlled cities in their home country that are in supply. You can put 1 unit or 2 divisions per major city. If there's still units to be placed, they're placed 1 unit or 2 divisions per minor city. A 1-factor artillery is treated as a division. 3 units can be placed in London or into an off-board box. Russian reinforcements cannot be placed in Lodz, which is in Poland. I don't remember where it is, but I think it's this one. Unless a specific location is identified on the OB, reinforcements are placed according to priorities, capital, cities generating artillery replacements, and then other cities. Reinforcements may overstack during placement. However, they must meet stacking limits by the end of the friendly movement phase. You get replacement points according to the order of battle, order of appearance. Those are spelled out here. You actually get them according to the number of cities you're holding. But whatever, it's on the same charts. The maximum number of RPs that a country may accumulate is specified in the OBOA. We use these chits. Sorry, not those chits. I have the victory points in there. These chits. And you've got different kinds of replacement points. I talked about that. There are 3 types: infantry, artillery, and tank. Infantry are used to replace infantry and cav. Artillery are used to replace field artillery and siege artillery, and tanks are used to replace tanks. The RPs available is equal to the total produced by controlled and supplied replacement cities in that country, plus any accumulated. And you select them from the replacement pool. The cost is its attack factor. That's fairly simple. Replacements are placed at controlled replacement cities in their home country that are in supply. A maximum of 1 replacement unit or 2 divisions can be placed in each replacement city per turn. A 1-factor artillery is treated as a division. 3 units can be placed in London. Replacements can overstack, etc. I think reinforcements and replacements are accounted for separately, which means you place your reinforcements and then you can put replacements in the same cities that you're getting reinforcements in. Unless we hit something else. Several countries not on the map board have arrival force locations for their reinforcements that are different. The U.S., any British or French port except Calais. Canada, any British port. Any? I think there's one. There's one British port. Okay. Australia, the Middle East box. India, the Middle East box, except for the 1st Indian Infantry Corps and 1st Cav Corps, which show up kind of early in the game, are placed in any British or French port. Each Strasstruppen unit costs 6 infantry RPs. Each siege artillery costs 6 artillery RPs, as opposed to normal cost. Artillery and tank reinforcements and replacements can only be placed in cities that generate artillery RPs, except for the U.S. units. Only 1 Strasstruppen can be replaced per turn. Only 1 tank can be replaced per turn. After a certain date, you use lower strength counters when replacing certain units. This is specified in the order of battle. This is going to be kind of tricky. We've got things like, let's see. Let's find the Brits. I know they have them. So it has replaced 794 Infantry Corps and 684 Infantry Corps as 574 Infantry Corps when eliminated. I think the counter mix has these units represented, this is not spelled out, of course, with like a parentheses around them. If you're keeping track of the exact unit designations, which I think is a pretty good idea if you're going to do replacement units and whatnot, but you don't actually have to pay attention to the designations. And what that means is, so like we're talking about the BEF here in particular with this instance. The initial British units are very strong, but then they get replaced the next time that they die with a weaker unit. This is different from, I think, both Balance of Power and La Grande Guerre, which have them automatically degrade in value. There's some question about just how good the BEF actually was. It was lucky, let's put it that way. But it was lucky because kind of the French took the brunt of the advance that they're kind of most famous for. Like the French took the brunt of the damage in it, and then the Brits managed to to gain a lot of ground quickly. So you can make your arguments different ways. Whatever. There are 2 counters for each such unit. When the lower strength unit is replaced, the higher strength unit is permanently removed from play. There's also units, I think, that get upgraded, but those just get upgraded. You don't have to kill them to get them upgraded, which is cool. The Desert Fox has units which you can upgrade, but you have to get them into the destroyed unit box to upgrade them. Now, you're allowed to get them in there, and I think OCS does as well. You're allowed to get them in there through other mechanisms rather than losing them in combat, but it's like an expense that you can't really afford to have your units knocked off the board. And then also a lot more units get weakened in that game, which in the OCS game. Certain terms used in order of battle, order of appearance require further explanation. Add. Here we go. The unit is added to the replacement pool. Now, there is one problem with one of these. It tells me to add the unit to the replacement pool, and it gives us setup hex. I don't remember which one this was. It could be that it's added to the replacement pool, but when it's built, it has to go in a particularly odd place. That feels weird. But anyway, cost 1 artillery replacement point. The British player has certain units, 574 Territorial Corps, that they have to pay to bring them in as initial reinforcements. Otherwise, they can just keep delaying them. Upgrade, the first unit listed is removed from the game. The second unit arrives as a reinforcement unit. Withdraw, the specified units are removed from the game. They're removed by priorities first in the replacement pool, then supplied on the board, unsupplied on the board. When the units are removed from the board, an equivalent number of infantry RPs are received by that unit's country. So essentially, they can rebuild a unit of the same size. It's just that unit is gone. Release, units are released from garrison duties or reserve. The U.S. Reserve, these units must be held in reserve until released. I haven't gotten to that because I'm not setting up the U.S. until they matter. Political activities, major European powers plus Belgium, Serbia, and Montenegro are in the war from the first week of August. Yeah, Italy's a major European power. Come on. Turkey's a major European power, sort of, kind of. Several other countries joined one side or the other as the war progressed. Luxembourg is considered to be German-controlled from the beginning of the game. Switzerland, Denmark, Sweden, and Spain are permanently neutral. You cannot declare war on these. Italy, Bulgaria, Romania, Greece, and the Ottoman Empire, and the United States are neutral at the start of the game. They can enter on a turn and side specified in the scenarios, or when a declaration of war is made against them. The Netherlands and Albania are also neutral. They remain neutral unless somebody declares war on them. While a country is neutral, no units can enter that country. A player may declare war on a neutral country during its reinforcement phase. It joins the other side, deploys any forces it has. To conquer a country, it varies from the country. For Germany, you need Berlin and Essen. For Austria-Hungary, you need Vienna and Budapest. For France, you need 4 major cities, including Paris. For Russia, St. Petersburg, Moscow, and Kharkov. Wow. Well, that doesn't happen historically. But the collapse rules, like in La Grande Guerre or Balance of Power, can trigger what amounts. Yeah, of course, this doesn't actually have the revolution in it. It's just the collapse rules, straight up. Italy, Rome, and Milan, Ottoman, all of its cities except Damascus. And every other country is all their cities. That includes Britain. Well, not really. The United States can't be conquered. Britain can be conquered only due to war weariness because there's no ability to invade Britain. And we got to swap batteries, so hold on. When a country is conquered, all of its units are removed from play at the end of the player segment. The country does not receive any further reinforcements or replacements. A country may be effectively conquered by an adverse result on the war weariness table that causes the country to sue for peace. I got to swap batteries. It looks like everything's charged now. It happened to me, but a day like today, back when my wife first died or whatever, I would be going out for a walk on a day like this. I just don't feel like it now. Anyway, let's get back to the rolls. I just like throwing a little something in when it hits my head. Okay. So, like in the Great War and World War I, well, like in I think everything that I've got, actually, you have to garrison countries that you conquer. A player must garrison all controlled major cities in a conquered country or an active enemy country. The following, this is more severe than those other games. The following minor cities must also be garrisoned: Brussels, Skopje, Philippopolis, Jassy, and Ankara. 1 corps or 2 divisions is required to garrison each. Wow, I thought at least I could break down and use divisions for this. Only infantry and cav can be used to garrison. A player loses 1 infantry RP from his next turn's replacement for each required garrison that he's short at the end of his player segment. A player is not required to garrison a city still controlled by an ally of the conquered country. Yeah. So if I conquer Russia, but there are Romanians holding a city, I don't have to garrison the city that I haven't taken yet. Fair enough. Italy was a member of the Triple Alliance along with Germany and Austria-Hungary when the war broke out. Italy declared its neutrality. Both France and Austria-Hungary have to maintain a core on or adjacent to the Italian border until Italy enters the war. This is just sort of, a rule that kind of fits with the other garrisons because it's like a garrison, but the BEF took up positions on the left flank of the French Fifth Army. The British Army maintained a separate sector in France throughout the war. British and French units cannot stack in France, Belgium, or Luxembourg, the Netherlands, or in Germany west of the Rhine. But east they can. They may move through each other's units, but may not be stacked at the end of a movement phase. They may not retreat into hexes occupied by the other nationality if any other legal retreat routes existed. If forced to retreat into the other nationality, they must unstack during movement. They may not advance into the same hex. If British and French units combine for an attack, there's a -1 DRM to the attack. British units may not enter Paris, hexes in France south of the 27XX row. How far south is that? Fuck. That's not very far south. Just 1 hex south of Paris, they can't go. Well, they can't go south of 1 hex south of Paris. Okay. Or hexes in Germany west of the Rhine that are south of that row. If they are forced to retreat into any of these hexes, they have to move back during their next movement phase if possible. While out of their sector, they function normally but must return to their sector as soon as they can. British Commonwealth are considered British for this. The Americans are considered French for all purposes. American units may only operate in France, Belgium, Luxembourg, and Germany south of the 25XX hex row. American reinforcements and replacements that arrive in France north of the French sector have to move towards to get it. Actually, they say they must end their turn in the French sector, which might mean having to do rail movement. One interesting question. Does the U.S. have any rail points? Because that would answer my question about do you count against both? It's in the charts and tables. Rail capacity. The U.S. does not have any rail points. To me, that means that you only have to worry about rail capacity if you're, by the way, the U.S. also doesn't have any sea capacity, but they are, I believe, allowed to make invasions. Maybe I'm mistaken about that. If the U.S. doesn't have any rail capacity, I think that means you only pay rail capacity for the nation in which you are using the rail. So German units in Austria-Hungary alone would use Austria-Hungary's rail capacity, but not the German capacity. But if they move from Germany into Austria-Hungary, they use both, which makes sense. I was not sure about that. But given that the U.S. has none and no rail network of their own, we can intuit what the meaning is. Economic warfare. The British blockade starts in January 1915. The blockade reduces the number of German and Austria-Hungary replacement points. It also will affect the war weariness rolls. And we've got it on a year-by-year basis. It also affects artillery replacements eventually. Beginning in March 1918, a +1 DRM is applied to the war weariness of all Central Powers. This goes up to +2 in September. It is possible to play this game further than 1918. It's an option. If Britain is conquered, the blockade is reduced, but not destroyed. This is bothersome, but let's keep going. I'll talk about it in a moment. The number of infantry RPs lost per turn is halved. Austria-Hungary loses 0 in 1916 and 1 in 1917. The war weariness DRM due to blockade is reduced by 1. So here's the problem. Let's say Britain somehow surrenders in 1916 before the US enters the war. Germany is still being blockaded, although their fleet is stronger than the French fleet. That's where I got a problem. The French and US combined, you could make an argument that probably the Germans can't handle that as easily. Although I got to tell you, in La Grande Guerre, I have seen the German fleet defeat the British fleet and then defeat the combined US-French fleet. So, and still lose the war. Okay. Submarine warfare. Germany is considered to have initiated submarine warfare in Britain starting in January 1915. The Germans suspended unrestricted submarine warfare during 1916 and resumed it in 1917. You have no control over this. When in effect submarine warfare reduces the number of British infantry replacement points, Britain loses 1 infantry RP per turn beginning in 15, except during 16, and then beginning in March 1917, a +1 DRM is also applied to Britain's war weariness rolls. This may change with variable entry, which is an option. I may be able to continue affecting the Brits with submarine warfare through 1916 at an increased chance of bringing the Americans in. There are games where you don't want to do any submarine warfare because you can hold the American entry off by avoiding it, and it just doesn't do that much to the Brits. Certainly not in here. Aid to Russia. The Russian army had chronic shortages of equipment and munition. One of the rationales for Gallipoli was to open a link to Russia. There's 2 main routes to Russia. The northern route, which has 2 options, and the southern route. The British sent some aid to Russia via Archangel beginning in 1915. However, Archangel was blocked by ice most of the year. The Russians built a railway from St. Petersburg to Murmansk. During 15 and 16, aid was then sent via Murmansk beginning in 17. The Russians can receive aid through either of these. Archangel option. The Russians get 1 infantry RP and 1 artillery RP at Archangel every June, July, August, and September turn, starting in 1915, if either Moscow or St. Petersburg is Russian-controlled and in supply. Murmansk allows them to get 1 RP, one infantry, 1 artillery RP at Murmansk every turn, starting in 1917 April, as long as St. Petersburg is in control and in supply. Now the southern route. The Allies can open a southern link to Russia through Constantinople and the Black Sea. They have to control the 5 Ottoman hexes noted before, and this gives an infantry and artillery RP to the Russian replacements during each Allied reinforcement phase that this link is open. These are in addition to whatever sent the northern route. Also subtract 1 from the Russian war weariness if the southern link is open. Russia must also have a controlled port on the Black Sea that can trace the link up to St. Petersburg, Moscow, or Kharkov to have this link open. Well, what does that all mean? I mean, we know what it means in game terms, but what I'm thinking of is this is, so the northern route is automatically just accounted for, and that's fine. But if the southern route is open, Britain gets the ability to send these extra munitions and equipment for free. For free. That feels wrong. If you look at La Grande Guerre, you can send resources to other countries, and it's worth trying to shore Russia up, perhaps, but you have to pay out of your own stuff. It's a choice that you make with Britain to do that. And you could actually say, you know what, we're not going to try to keep Russia in the war. We're going to try to win the war more heavily in the West Front. It's probably worth trying to keep Russia open. But the real question is, the Brits should probably get less RPs of their own if they open that southern route up and choose to use it. Anyway, we're low on battery. We're going to swap out again. We're halfway through the rule book. That's a good sign. And we'll keep going for a little bit. When I do these rules, just reading through them, I know that they're not terribly valuable. Chime in to me if you do find them valuable, to just have me wading through them. I'm curious about it. I don't think it's going to change what I do, because basically I can't explain the rules to a game that I haven't played very recently. So like me going over the rules, I don't think it's going to change my behavior, but there's a matter of curiosity here. I can't explain the rules at a quick level, in good depth and detail, and give you everything about the game. One thing about going through the rules like this is I'm able to comb through them and find, little inconsistencies and such. Now, these seem pretty good. But I don't know how much value that really is to a player. I just did, Bloody April, whose rules were very troublesome to me. I couldn't do it this way. And instead, I'm fudging my way through the rules during play, which is a very painful process that adds to the issues elsewhere. I tend to have to look up rules anyway, though. But I don't know how much value this is to other people. It is of value to me because I read the rules very lightly, not absolutely lightly, but as lightly as I would to play a game anyway. But it's very helpful to me to go through them a second time with this finer comb when I'm not absolutely certain of how the game's going to play out, etc. Where are we? We're at weather. There's two weather zones in the map, just west and east. I don't know where the distinguishing line is. West of the weather line, east of the weather line. Okay. I think that's that. No, that's a national border. Huh. Weather line, it's kind of a bluish dotted line. Like, I feel like Turkey should be not the same as Russia. Let's put it that way. So, I'm looking for the weather line. Okay, we got it here. So it starts here, runs down the Russian border, that's fine. Cuts halfway through Austria, that's fine. Where were we before we picked up the Russian line? Yeah, East Prussia is going to be in the winter. We cut down here, and then we slide over, and I'm guessing it's there. I see some kind of dashing there, which means that most of the Balkans are outside the winter east weather line, and the Ottoman Empire is. If you really want it to be silly, you would look and say, you know what, southern Italy, I'm not sure. Certainly Algeria and Tunisia wouldn't be affected. Yeah, Algeria and Tunisia have no effect on play. Southern Italy is really unlikely to. And do get some winter effect. The further south you go, the more questionable that gets, but it's probably not worth rules for it. Italy will probably surrender to one side or the other. Did we have what you need for Italy? Rome and Milan, yeah. I mean, you know, Rome is pretty warm already, but I'm more worried at Naples and below, where it really kind of... And you get rain and whatnot. Okay. It's really that you might get snow in southern Italy in a way that is unlikely. I'm not saying there's never any snow, but... where were we? Right. 3 types of weather effect that can come up from the die rolls on there, and we've got it by different month and what it shows up in. Red versus blue. No, it's left versus right. Is going to be western and eastern fronts. Okay, clear has no effect on play. Mud, reduce movement factor of all ground units by 1. But a unit with a movement factor of 5 is reduced to 3. That's Cav, I think, only. Reduce the length of all overland supply paths from 5 hexes down to 4. Each railhead can only be advanced 2 hexes per turn. Snow, have the movement factors, rounding up, of all ground units. Reduce rail movement bonus from 30 to 24. Reduce the length of overland supply from 5 to 3. You can see where those rail nets are going to become more restrictive by a lot. Each railhead may be advanced 1 hex per turn. Lakes in Russia freeze. You can walk across them, trace supply, or attack across them. The Dvina, Luga, Volkhov, Volga, and Oka rivers freeze. The attacker doesn't take a penalty for attacking across them. They get a strength penalty, apparently. And no invasions can be conducted. If a unit moves, traces a supply path, or advances a railhead in both weather zones in the same phase, the more restrictive weather effects are used. I don't think it's if a unit advances a railhead, it's if the railhead is advanced, because I think you have to have a unit in each hex where it's advanced, but I don't think that unit can be moving. Let's take a look at that. Ugh. Oh no, you're allowed to enter. Okay. All right. You're allowed to advance the railhead while you're moving. Okay. But I would say that, yeah, whatever. I don't know what. It's basically that if you're advancing it across the weather line, and this is really unlikely. It's like if the Russians are moving through East Prussia, or I don't know, if you get knocked back after advancing in one direction or another. It's not going to happen in many places. Might be in the Balkans. Here we have the weather line kind of hitting in a place in Romania. That's the most likely, I guess. But yeah, where the railhead can only move forward a number of hexes equal to the worst weather type that it goes through. Let me pause for a moment because that battery is not charging, and it should be. Oh, this battery is not fully charged. Okay, let's swap over. Realizing I only went downstairs, filled my pipe and whatnot because I wanted to fiddle with that and get it charging again. So it's fine, but I've already swapped batteries on this, which is probably good. Okay. The rule which first got me interested in this game is the national morale rule. Because, again, the two games that I was most familiar with the World War One by SPI, a little game, kind of a folio-size game, and The Great War by Rand Gaming Associates, not the Rand Corporation. There may be some link in terms of like somebody involved in it. But anyway, I initially thought that it was the Rand Corporation put out a game. Like, that's so cool. No. Both of those do not handle national will across the board. The only game that handles it in real depth is La Grande Guerre, and it's a really cool system where, you suffer bad effects, but then you recover from them immediately. Mutinies, but they can turn into, military dictatorships that are stronger than the actual the historical results. So you could get like Kerensky or Ludendorff or somebody like that take over and actually strengthen the country through the national will system, which is gives so much detail and story in it. Anyway, starting in December of 1915, every March, June, September, and December, you have to check your morale. A country is not required until it's been at war for at least a year, so like Italy historically wouldn't have to check immediately. The U.S. never checks morale. A country checks morale by rolling a die, applying DRMs, and consulting the war weariness table. Might be kind of interesting to look at what these are. So we've got like locations here. It's kind of weird. Got a time. Each time you get low morale or desertions, you get a penalty. Central Power gets penalties from the blockades. Allies should get penalties from the submarine warfare. Well, the Brits should. Yeah, it's listed there. Then by per nation, these are territories conquered. It's not clear there. If the Central War declares war on the Netherlands, they have an additional penalty on them. Got these listed here. I'm looking at the interesting ones, in particular, U.S. units in Britain or France improve Britain's morale. Russia. I mean, Russia can lose a lot of cities, and so, yeah, it kind of makes sense. It's just, you're missing that, they're ripe for revolt, but honestly, again, La Grande Guerre bakes potentials of revolts in for every nation, so. I think Pétain takes over in France. Just because he gets blackened, his name gets blackened in World War II. Okay. R and M results are applied for the following 3 months, whatever. We'll get to that. NE is no effect. R is reduced replacements. Infantry replacement points are reduced by the indicated percentage. This is done after any losses due to cities, blockades, or submarine warfare. Round fractions up to the nearest whole number. The minimum number of factors lost can never be less than 1. And on an R30, you also lose an artillery and tank RP. M is low morale. Units may not attack. This is what happened like the French Mutiny. Attacker receives a +1 DRM when attacking units of countries with low morale and add +1 to all future morale check results. Ugly. because you start to collapse. D is desertions. That's a step worse. This may actually be. Roll a die for each unit. On a roll of 1 or 2, the unit deserts and is eliminated. Add +1 to all future morale checks. It's kind of interesting. Feels like these should be cumulative. And then S is surrender. The country is considered conquered. Now, I believe if you conquer Russia with Germany, and this is what's fucked up, you have to garrison every major city in Russia. That is not what historically happened. The Germans, I mean, after the collapse, the Germans kept fighting for a while because the Russians wouldn't actually sit down and talk peace. And they conquered territory because the Russian armies were just falling. But they didn't get to Moscow. They didn't get to St. Petersburg. And they sure the hell didn't garrison them. And they sure the hell didn't garrison stuff even further east. Moscow's pretty far east. But they kind of had to leave more troops than the garrison limitation. So, I don't know. The game does not cover additional production that you might have gotten off of conquests. World War II games tend to do that. World War I don't. I think there was some production capabilities that were added to in World War I, but it wasn't as significant as what happened in World War II. So that's that. The DRMs for M's and D's are cumulative. You can, the country just slowly is on a collapse route. So that's the base rules to the game. Let's look at the optional rules. First one's flexible mobilization. I'm not going to worry about this because I'm not going to play with it. I'm playing with the historical variant. But essentially, you're given much freer setup and can make your own war plans from the beginning of the war. An argument I have against that is that, look, something like the Schlieffen Plan and Plan 17 were very much baked in. There was not much chance of them being overridden. And in fact, we're going to have optional rules to handle these that we will be playing with. Variable entry. Standard rules have neutral countries entering the war on their historical entry dates. This one we're going to play. The DRMs reflect current strategic and political situation. They're all cumulative. A die is rolled at the beginning of the Central Powers for each of the following countries on indicated terms. Apply applicable DRMs and determine whether they join one side or the other. I don't know who goes first. I'm assuming the Central Powers. The Ottomans roll every 3 months beginning in August of 1914. The first roll is made on the August 2 turn, and the second roll is made in November 1914. They need a 6 or more. Remember, this is a 10-sider. And we've got modifiers. Each German and Austrian and Hungary major city that's been conquered gives a penalty. Each French or Russian major city, except for Lodz, controlled by the CP, gives it. If Bulgaria has already joined the Central Powers, there's a bonus for that. Italy, starting in November 1914, needs a 3 or less to join the Allies, a 14 or more to join the Central Powers. Penalty for the U.S., the later you get, the less likely Italy is going to join the Central Powers. And then conquests. And November 1914 gives a big +3. That's not good enough to have any chance of getting Italy you've got to conquer some stuff, and that will be in France. Doesn't count. They don't care about Serbia or Russia. Bulgaria, starting in April 1915, needs a 9 or more to join the Central Powers. Conquering Russians counts, along with some minor cities. And the Ottomans give a bonus to the Bulgarians. Romania, every 6 months, beginning in February 16, they join the Allies on a 3 or less. They join the Central Powers on a 12 or more. Once you hit August 1916, they become more aligned with the Allies. And again, conquests, U.S. gives a bonus to the Allies. Central Powers controlling Paris is a big bonus. And Russian cities are especially a bonus. Greece, every 6 months beginning June 16. Join the Allies on a 0 or less. Join the Central Powers on an 11 or more. An Allied unit in Salonika. Well, this is interesting. How do you get an Allied unit in Salonika if Greece isn't in the war, or if you didn't declare war on Greece? I don't know the answer to that. The United States in the war, I mean, historically, this is how they got the Greeks in, is that they made a landing and the Greeks went in with it. June 1917 and later, the Central Powers controlling Paris is a big penalty, or is a big bonus for the Central Powers. The U.S. itself, roll every 12 months beginning in April 1915. They need a 0 or less from the Allies. I don't know what a 0 on the die is, if it's a 10 or a 0. Interestingly enough, there doesn't seem to be a rule on the die. Wow. Do we have anything? We have the die roll for the weather, which is not modified, and that goes from 1 to 10. So I'm assuming the 0 runs as a 10. That's a major lack if I didn't just miss it looking for it. Okay, where are we? U.S., yeah. Submarine warfare in effect. Yeah, you know, I think it should be up to the Central Powers whether or not they apply their submarine warfare. The problem with that is the second year of submarine warfare is really when the Brits should start getting their war weariness. The Central Powers declares war on the Netherlands, a per year bonus. If the Allies declare war on the Netherlands, there's a +1. If the United States joins the Allies in 15, 16, or 18, the dates for reinforcements, replacements, and release are modified, and they tell you where to put them. This move back by 6 months. Oh, that's if they enter too late. Fair enough. National fronts. Certain countries would only deploy their forces to certain fronts. There are 5 fronts in the game. The Western Front is France, Belgium, Luxembourg, the Netherlands are within 7 of one of those countries. Eastern is in Russia, or within 7 of a hex in Russia. Italian's Italy, or within 7 of a hex in Italy. Balkans is Serbia, Montenegro, Albania, Bulgaria, Romania, Greece, or within 5 of one of those countries. And the Middle East is the Ottoman Empire, including the Middle East box, or within 5 of a hex in the Ottoman Empire. So you could actually get it up into Bulgaria with that. The 5 and 7 hex path cannot be traced across Switzerland or sea. Germany can put its units anywhere. There's no limitation. So they can essentially loan units into Austria at any amount. Most games prevent that from happening because it can, I don't know. Austria, only in the Eastern Balkan and Italian. Oh, Eastern. Yeah, Eastern is in Russia. Okay, fair enough. I was like, I can't invade Russia with my Austrians? That's a problem. I mean, well, yeah. The Bulgarian troops only in the Balkan front, Ottoman, Middle East, and Caucasus. This is notable. I'm not allowed to go into the Balkans with the Turks. That's something that that I often do in the SPI World War One, and I think in the Great War. Doesn't happen in La Grande Guerre. I don't remember in Balance of Power, but those units. First of all, in the SPI game, the units are absolutely useless anywhere else. So the only thing they can do is kind of move into Bulgaria, and they end up garrisoning Bulgaria and let the better Bulgarian troops, the crack Bulgarian army, fight the Romanians, because the Turks are fine on defense, but they don't have good offensive capability in that game. France, Western, Italian, Balkan, and Middle East, but not the Middle East box. Britain, anywhere except the Eastern and Caucasus. Russia is only allowed in the Eastern and Caucasus, Serbia in the Balkan, Montenegro in the Balkan, Belgium in the Western, Italy, Italian, or Albania within 4 hexes of Albania. But you have to declare war on Albania to get in there. Romania in the Balkan, Greece in the Balkan, United States only on the Western Front. Yeah, I'm pretty sure the U.S. doesn't have any invasion capability. Netherlands only on the Western Front. There's some overlap. If you're allowed broadly. Take it as loose as you can. If Italy is an allied country, German units may not enter Italy nor attack hexes in Italy until September 1916. Italy didn't actually declare war on Germany until after they declared war on Austria before. French and British units may not enter Italy until one of the conditions is met. Either Italy joins the Central Powers, or the Central Powers capture an Italian city, or January 1918. To keep you from throwing lots of French troops in to attack Austria-Hungary, something I've seen in La Grande Guerre, actually. Similarly, Italian units cannot enter France until French and British units are eligible to enter Italy. Once the British are allowed to move into Italy, British units may rail through France south of their limitation to get into Italy. Schlieffen Plan. German war plan was to concentrate most of their army in the west, following restrictions applied during August and September 1914. August 1, no German units on the Western Front may move in a northeast, east, or southeast direction. Fair enough. The Western Front consists of hexes in France, Belgium, Luxembourg, and Netherlands, or within 7 of a hex in one of those countries. I think that you could play without National Front, but play with this. August 2, a maximum of 2 German corps on the Western Front may rail outside of the Western Front. The 3 ersatz corps, I guess they're the ones that are labeled with an E on them, are exempt from this restriction. No other German units on the Western Front may rail outside of the Western Front. This is the Hindenburg reinforcements when he takes over in East Prussia for Tannenberg. September, a maximum of 2 German corps on the Western Front may rail outside of the Western Front. The North Army is exempt from this restriction. I don't remember what the North Army is. I don't know if it's the Hamburg Force. I think it's the Hamburg Force. I'd have to look that up. So I can send that east. No other German units on the Western Front may rail outside the Western Front. Okay, France's equivalent, Plan 17. France had a war plan. They wanted to attack with their 5 armies towards the east. Here's what they have to do. Units belonging to the 5 French armies, including their reserves, plus the interior reserve, cannot move north of hex row 25XX during August 1 and 2. So I can't go north of this line, which means I can't really hold Belgium. The French must attack at least 2 German-controlled hexes south of Metz, inclusive. On the August 1st turn, they must also attack at least 2 German-controlled hexes on August 2. These hexes can be any hexes on the Western Front south of row 25XX inclusive. At least 1 attack versus each hex must be made at 1-to-1 or higher odds. So this is interesting. This game does not have the concept of offensives. Again, it's more in line with the other older games, SPI and the Great War by Rand, than it is with Balance of Power or La Grande Guerre. Offensives are a key concept in this war, and I really kind of miss that being there, but this may well avoid certain other problems that those games have. Okay, Austria-Hungary's Second Army. I need a drink. Austria's war plan called for the Second Army to mobilize north of Belgrade and attack Serbia. While it was deploying, the Austrian-Hungarian General Staff realized they would need more corps. Beginning the second half of August, the majority of the Second Army was transferred to Galicia to support the right flank of the forces there. During August 1, 6 units of the Second Army must be moved out of Serbian zones into the Austro-Hungarian rail hexes. These 6 units must include the 3rd Corps, at least 2463, at least 1353. On August 2, at least 4 of these units must be railed and end their move within 2 hexes of Lemberg. I don't know if I like this one. The Austrians are set up with a war set up to go into Serbia. This feels like a decision that the Austrians may want to make, much like the Hindenburg reinforcements, but I feel like this should be up to the player. This is not a fixed war plan the way Plan 17 or the Schlieffen Plan are. This isn't something that the nations are just committed to pre-war. So I think I'm going to skip this one because I think it limits the Austrians too much and takes away a what if, which is what if they tried to crack the Serbians and gave ground. You could make an argument that there should be some sort of penalty, but there kind of is. There's the war weariness factor. If you start losing cities, it's bad for you. And Austria has issues. Tracing an overland supply path through rough terrain or enemy zones of control is more difficult than unimpeded clear hexes. Each hex of overland supply that goes through a forest, mountain, or swamp counts as 1.5. Each hex that goes through an enemy zone of control counts as 1.5. In this case, the hex must be occupied by a friendly ground unit. Tracing an overland supply route through something that's both will count as 2. The extra half hex due to an enemy zone of control is negated by if the friendly ground unit is entrenched or the hex contains a friendly fort. So you can trace at normal costs through entrenchments and forts, through zones of control. Bad terrain always will cost you, and without entrenchment or fort, enemy zones of control will cost you. I want to check. I'm not sure why that battery is not charging. I think there might be something going weird on that one. Might end up with a nasty surprise, but it seems to, I think it's fully charged. It's hard to tell. All right, breakdown counters. A number of units of core size can break down into 2 division size units for greater operational flexibility. We get what they get. So like a 574 breaks into a 344 and a 234. These units, I believe, are marked with a B in brackets. There was a space over here. I got to get that paper clip here. This is the breakdown box. Obviously, I don't have things perfectly aligned because the lettering is not aligned. The whole units go back in there. You're able to rebuild those units by getting the appropriate pieces back together. Phasing player can break down units at the beginning of his movement. They can recombine units at the end of their movement. They have to be in the same hex to recombine. When an unsupplied core breaks down, the 2 breakdowns are both the same level of unsupplied. When one or more unsupplied breakdowns recombine, they assume the unsupplied status that's worst. Demoralized units cannot do this. Units can retreat into a hex in an enemy zone of control if the hex is occupied by a friendly ground unit and no other legal retreat route is possible. In this case, the retreating ground units are still eliminated, but the owning player gets RPs equal to half of the attack factors back. We'll play with that. See, the game allows you to kind of ooze into the enemy. And you can maintain supply by having units behind it, but you still can't retreat into a zone of control. But here, it's a little bit better. Country morale rolls can have a significant effect on the game. For play balance purposes, players can make just one war weariness roll and apply it to each applicable country. Fuck that. We want to roll for each country individually and get a richer story. The Orgone Forest. This is challenging to locate on a hex grid. Yeah, okay, thanks. There's some of the forest in 2751, 2851, and 2852. Okay, this is going to be important. 2751 is right here. It is a full forest hex in the game. What they're saying to do instead, any overland so 2751 is not a forest hex. I don't know if I want to do this. Overland movement across 2751 to 2 of these hex sides counts as forest, and attack across those 2. So it's 2851, 2852. This feels like it's too. So it would be between here and these. Counts as moving into a forest. This counts as attacking into a forest. A tank doesn't get its DRM when it's attacking across because it doesn't get it in forests. I don't know. I think I'm going to just go with it as a plain forest. I don't feel like this makes it particularly uglier. Extended campaign game. The war didn't necessarily have to end in the fall of 1918. You can play out through 19. You play until September 19, use the 1918 victory conditions. Obviously, that's giving more time, but it's not necessarily clear. Like, I think that's going to be worse for the Central Powers, but I also don't like stopping things. I might calculate the victory points at the end of 18. The following sudden death victory conditions are used at the end of 1918. Central Powers wins if he has 16 or more victory points. The Allied player wins if the Central Powers has 7 or less victory points. The blockade effects in 19 are the same as 18. One last rule. Straßtruppen, we are going to play with that just because if they do manage to last it out, I consider that interesting. But again, I think we'll calculate the 1918 victory conditions anyway. This optional rule provides additional detail beyond just a DRM for Straßtruppen. If an attack with one Straßtruppen in each attacking hex may be declared an infiltration attack, as long as the Straßtruppen are in supply, the weather is not snow, and the attacked hex does not contain a fort. What does it do? Attacking artillery units may neutralize defending artillery units on a one-for-one basis. Neutralized artillery, both sides, are ignored for the rest of the combat against the hex. Note that that's going to be advantageous to the attacker, because if you knock out an enemy artillery, if you just delete it, if you delete artillery one for one, you're taking about the same strength away. That means there's less strength that you have to get that like 2-to-1 odds on or whatever. However, they must retreat if required by a result of the infiltration attack. Siege artillery. Okay, now this is weird. Siege artillery is used to show Bruckmüller artillery concentrations. I don't know what the fuck that's supposed to mean. I just don't know. It allows you to put more artillery in the hex. Maybe that's the deal there. If at least one defending unit is eliminated due to a combat result, then the defense line is ruptured, and all defending units remaining in the hex must retreat after all combat results are applied. That's potent. During the first, and you're not going to get like the 1918 attacks on the West Front, and you may not get the equivalent stuff that happened earlier on the East Front without this role. So I think it's pretty necessary. During the first month in which infiltration attack is declared on a front, Western, Eastern, Italian, and Balkan are the fronts. If an air unit is committed to an infiltration attack, then the defending units in that attack may not retreat. If they're required to, they're eliminated instead. That is huge. Note this simulates the surprise and resulting chaos when generals and troops were faced with the new tactics. If the defending hex is then vacant, then attacking infantry and cav must advance up to stacking limits, with Straßtruppen units taking the priority, which might affect how you want to stack your units so that you don't end up with empty hexes because all your Straßtruppen were in one hex. Well, they have to be in every hex that you're attacking from, so that shouldn't be an issue. Then we get all the scenario set up. Home Before the Leaves Fall is just a 1914 scenario. We've got the Grand Campaign as the second scenario. Nothing in between. And then a 1918 scenario to show the end of the war with different setup. This is kind of a nice result. Most World War I games are going to give you a lot of different scenarios. I feel like this is an opportunity, though, that's kind of missed. Like, someone should probably at least make online availability, if it's not there, of different periods of the war. And then each scenario has its own special rules. Now I need to swap batteries to look at the special rules. At a Schlieffen plan and a Plan 17, what we don't have is idiot rules for the Rennenkampf Samsonov attacks up here in East Prussia. Those are included in La Grande Guerre. I don't know if any other game I have puts any requirement on them. We have all the shit here. Most of it is using the 1914 scenario, but they have special rules here for the 1914 in scenario 1, and then special rules for scenario 2, which is the whole war, but I think they repeat them. All units move a maximum of 1 hex. This is on the August 1st turn. This 1 hex move may be into a hex normally requiring 2 movement points or from one enemy zone of control to another. Units required to set up in specific cities may not move if they are more than 3 hexes from the nearest enemy-controlled hex. No rail movement is allowed. They're being used. The Allied player can use sea movement to move the British units in London to Le Havre. They must end their turn there. Well, we'll do that. Belgian units must end their move in a Belgian city if possible, and no automatic victory attacks can be made, which makes things less fluid, actually. But it's because this is a very short turn. First of all, it's half a month, but also the forces aren't fully mobilized and whatnot, even at the very beginning. The August 2 turn, rail capacities are reduced by 1/3. The rail movement bonus is reduced from 30 to 20 hexes. That's pretty liberal given that it's half a month again. The Allied player can use sea movement to move French unit in Algiers to Marseille and the British unit in London to Le Havre. All these units must end their turn in these ports. The German R9 and L1 Corps and the French R7 Corps may not move. So there are some units that are not released that couldn't move in the first turn, but now also still can't move. We got neutral countries enter the war on the side indicated. We're going to play with the variable there. They deploy when they're placed in. We have the deployments for all the neutrals. Okay, here we go. Greece. Here's the Salonika rule. Greece was politically divided with a pro-Central Powers king and a pro-Allied prime minister. In October 1915, Allied units may sea move to Salonika. This is not considered to be an invasion, but the initial unit's landing may not move any further. No declaration of war is required. The action does not trigger Greek entry. Greece remains neutral. Salonika was seized as a supply base for the Serbians who were falling back, actually. Which it can do that. If Salonika is Allied control, a Greek corps arrives as a reinforcement in Salonika at the end of the Allied October 16 turn. This unit is treated as Allied even before the Greeks enter. Until the Greeks enter in June 1917 or whenever, Allied units in Greece may not enter hexes south of hex row 60XX, nor use Greek railroads for movement and supply. I'm guessing 60XX is this. No, it's here. Okay. The Netherlands is neutral at the start of the war. Either player can declare war on them. When a declaration of war is made on the Netherlands, the other player sets up the Dutch. Player may not use sea movement to or from Antwerp unless he also controls Central Powers. Declares war on the Netherlands. Yeah, if the Allies declare war, it adds a victory point to the Central Powers total and makes U.S. entry harder. The French R11 Corps is in Paris. This unit may not move until a German unit is within 5 of Paris or October 1914. Ugh. Just turn that unit upside down. That's one of my garrisons. Okay. Caucasus. Russia and the Ottoman Empire commit initial forces as required. Additionally, the Ottomans must commit infantry corps, 2 infantry corps. In September 1916, the Ottomans must commit 1 infantry RP per month beginning in December 1914. I don't know what that means. The Russian infantry RP for Tiflis is automatically committed to the Caucasus box. It is not listed on the Russian order of battle. I don't know what that means. I get the feeling that it's going to, that the Turks just have to burn an RP, that it doesn't actually go into there or into any units there. The Central Powers may withdraw 1 corps from the Caucasus box 2 months after Russia is conquered. It's placed in Angora. The Allied player can withdraw 1 Russian corps from the Caucasus box 1 month after the Ottoman Empire is conquered. It is placed in Rostov. If Russia is conquered, the Ottoman Empire is no longer required to commit infantry RPs. If the Ottoman Empire is conquered, add 1 to the Russian infantry RPs. Okay. For Tiflis. Middle East box. The Ottoman Empire must commit initial forces as specified in Special Rule 2.63. That's going to be their setup. Additionally, the Ottomans must commit 1 infantry corps in July 15, July 16, and July 17. The Ottomans do not have to commit corps in July 16 and 17 unless the number of British corps exceeds the number of Ottoman corps in the box. The Ottoman Empire must commit 1 infantry RP per month beginning in December 1914. Britain must commit the following reinforcements. The number of brackets is the minimum number of corps that Britain must have in the Middle East box. This requires using sea movement. The British player may rotate units in and out of the Middle East box provided the minimum number of corps is maintained. Beginning in June 1916, a +1 is added to war weariness if the Ottoman Empire, for the Ottoman Empire if Britain has 5 or more corps in the Middle East box. I don't know what this all means. Oh, this is a total number of corps that they have to have. And then the reinforcements actually go in there. Fair enough. If the Ottoman Empire is conquered, the number of corps that Britain needs to maintain in the Middle East box is reduced to 2. It might be less than 2 to begin with. The Allied player may begin making invasions in March 1915. An invasion can be made against a single hex or 2 adjacent hexes. A maximum of 3 infantry or cav corps and 1 field artillery can conduct an invasion. You'd think this would be in the rules, but units invading a port or beach bordering the Atlantic must begin their move in an Atlantic port. Units invading a beach or port bordering the Mediterranean has to begin their move in the Mediterranean. That's just repeating. There must be at least 2 months between invasions attempted by 1 corps or less, and 4 months if you do invasions with more than 1 corps. With an example, the Allied player cannot invade Hamburg, Bremen, Antwerp, Rouen, or Bordeaux. Okay. Forgot you can invade ports. So used to. Okay. I'm not going to be able to get to Kiel because that's within the Baltic. I can't operate there. There is a beach here, which is my only real invasion spot up there. Guess I could slip in on the Netherlands with that declaration of war. That doesn't sound wise. If an invasion is made against Trieste, Constantinople, or a hex in Germany, the Allied player has to roll on the invasion table for each invading unit. After observing all the invasion table rolls, the Allies can cancel the invasion. If the invasion is canceled, all invading units other than those already eliminated are considered to be aborted. The action still counts as an invasion for the recuperation. And yeah. It would be very hard to get to Constantinople. 60-25, 61-24. 61-24, 60-25 are these two, because their initial guns there. Victory conditions. There's 3 ways to win the campaign. The Central Powers wins immediately if he conquers both France and Russia. The Allies win if they conquer Germany. Either player can win a sudden death victory on 1914 or 1916. I'm out of battery. At the end of 1914, the Central Powers gets points for a bunch of cities in France, Russia, Belgium, or Serbia. And also gets 1 point for cities that are in Germany or Austria-Hungary that are not taken by the Allies at the end of December 1914. But only a half victory point is received for a city that can't trace an overland rail supply path. They also get a point if the Allies declare war on the Netherlands. The Central Powers wins if he gets more than 13 victory points. The Allies win if he gets less than 8. That 8 is probably 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yeah, that means they're losing territory already. At the end of 16, they get victory points for cities in Allied countries occupied by Central Powers. A broader set of ones, but they lose victory points for cities taken against them. Only half points if it can't trace. They get a point for the Netherlands if the Allies declare war on it. Central Powers has to have 9 or more to win. The Allies have to have the Central Powers down to 3. But the Central Powers isn't getting points for their own cities. Now, they only need 13 victory points. They have 10 if they can hold their own. 2, 4, 6, 8. Yeah, they have 10 for holding their own. So I only have to take 4 things to win the game. That's possible in the 1914. Interestingly, Paris isn't vital to this. I almost feel like Paris, the Schlieffen Plan, the whole idea is that Paris is so important to the Schlieffen Plan. It doesn't really appear to be. I don't remember the limitations anymore. If neither player has won by the end of 1918, you determine victory. Well, there's actually, because of the extended campaign game, there is a sudden death victory at 18, where the Germans have to have 16 or more. The Allies have to have them down to 7 or less. And I think that'll be using these victory points. I'm not sure. Let's look at the 19 extended. Use the 1918 to determine the winner. Yeah. So I think you do a quick calculation at the end of 18 to see if the game ends in a negotiated peace of some sort, because one side or the other is winning heavily. The historical result is Austria was already collapsing, Russia obviously had collapsed, and Germany collapsed, essentially, to end the war. So I don't think it was a sudden death loss, but I'm not sure. It might be. But we're gonna try with all of that. We'll see what happens. I don't know. It's turning dark. It's like 4 p.m. or something like that, 4:30. Friday, I said I didn't go dancing, but what I did do, I napped. But I don't know if I mentioned this weird card I got, which was from what I don't know. It said there's an open house. It listed an address on my street that's quite close to mine, and there was an email address on it which asked to RSVP. I don't know what the hell. Open house to me usually means that somebody's showing off something they want to sell, a house they want to sell. But this was like 7 to 9 p.m. on Friday, which is not when realtors usually show houses. So I don't think it was that. And I looked at the email address, and it had an odd name on it. I don't remember what it was, which I looked up. And the thing that it is was a single malt Scotch brand. So I think what it was like an MLM, a multi-level marketing type thing, where somebody on my street is, doing something kind of like a Tupperware party, but it's a Scotch tasting party or something like that, which would have been kind of cool, except that I have to deal with people, and I'm not really all that into Scotch. I mean, I'm actually really not into it. I like bourbons better. But I don't know. If I was awake enough to go to that, I would have gone dancing, right? It was really, really hard. It was a really kind of almost painful decision not to go out, but I just felt so sleepy and so tired. I'd slept all day, but I just wanted to sleep more. But I did walk by, and it's like 2 houses down from mine. There are some kind of fancier houses to the left of me and to the right of me. Mine is kind of the dingiest of them. Like the house directly. I don't know if it was this house or not. Either the house that was there or a different one has a tower built up on it. Just cool shit going on. With these, as opposed to the houses down below, which don't look very impressive at all. And then, I go further to the right on my street, and the houses get less impressive. Further to the left on my street, the houses get less impressive. So I don't know. It's kind of a weird neighborhood, but to send to people on the street just kind of at random. At first I thought maybe it was my neighbor on the right who actually, I exchange words with, but whoever this is, I have never spoken to or anything. Just very, very odd. And I mean, if you were trying to sell the house, you probably wouldn't, if it was an open house of that nature, you probably wouldn't be inviting people just like off the street. It just seems really, really weird to me. And it was like, a professionally done card and everything. Just very, very odd. I kind of wish I had gone just to find out about it, but I was too tired and would have gone dancing if I wasn't too tired. But I did walk by about an hour after it was done or so, hour and a half, and looked at the house. It was all lit up and everything, but there wasn't anything exciting going on. It was an hour and a half after the thing was supposed to end. But anyhow, just thought I'd throw that in there. We will get to playing this sometime soon. I'm kind of tired again and have some computer game stuff to do. But yeah, it should be interesting to look at, what is basically a revitalization or whatever of a 45-year-old game, I have another such, which is the War and Peace, but it's weird because it just keeps releasing new versions again and again, and I'm like, Jesus, I wouldn't have fucking bought it if I had known you were going to keep putting out new versions. It's like what pissed me off about Axis Empires. I would love to get the new version of that, but I'm not willing to put $300 down on something that I already put a couple $100 down on, just because they didn't fucking bother to make just an expansion to it. And I did that once in my life. I played with SFB. I kept repeatedly buying the new stuff. I started with the Designer's Edition, bought all the little expansions, bought the Captain's Edition because I'm like, yeah, this isn't working. Was it the Captain's Edition? No, it was. I don't remember what it was. It's like it wasn't the Captain's Edition. Captain's Edition was. I don't remember. There was like Commander's Edition and Captain's Edition. I think those were the two. And I think the Commander's Edition was the first one. And it's like expanded since then, and they just keep adding shit to it, and I'm like, yeah, I get done. If ASL at least hasn't released different versions to replace the old version, and everything should have been upgradable. Anyway, let us load this up.